Hi, hello. My name is Maris, and welcome to my show, Critical Root Zone, where we dig deep with inquiring minds to get to the root of sustainability, going below the surface to rebuild trust while supporting all voices on our journey to a climate-positive planet. And so my guest for this next series on energy is one of my favorite people to be around, Professor Dodd Galbreath. So Dodd has founded the Institute for Sustainable Practice and is the director of the graduate programs at Lipscomb University. And we're going to get to know a lot more about him and what he's done in maybe more than this 37 years of sustainability. He'll let me know if this is the correct number of years, because I feel like his whole life has been dedicated to sustainability. And I'm just super excited to talk to him because we've been friends for a while, and it's fascinating, all of the conversations I've already had with him, and I'm pumped to do it on air. Welcome back to Critical Root Zone, when I am here with my friend and mentor, Professor Dodd Galbreath. For episode 1, we talk all things Dodd. So if you want to know more about him and his background, I highly encourage you to go back and check that one out. And episode 2, we dig into fossil fuels, simplify it, talk a lot about what they are, and fossil fuels, period. Episode 3, green energy, renewable energy, sustainable energy. What is it, and how does it all tie in? That's where we are today. So episode 4 here with Professor Dodd Galbreath. Thank you for being here.
Glad to be.
We're going to tie it all in, and this is the finale. It's been so much fun already. And I think we've got so much good content already. But this one I'm super excited about because we started to kind of scratch the surface of, yes, we know what's happening, right? We have known what's happening. Science tells us this is what we need to change, this is what we need to do, but there's a lot of politics involved. And in our country, where I feel like we have the most advantages, right? We have the most will and power to make these changes.
Yeah.
And you don't see them happening fast enough. And you worked in government.
Mm-hmm.
You have experience there. Mm-hmm. And I've heard you say before that you wanted to you got out of government to make a little bit of a different impact, and could you expand a little bit about that and like what you mean by that?
Yeah, when I first entered government, I was with an agency called the Soil Conservation Service that was created by Franklin Delano Roosevelt after the Dust Bowl, and it was a very successful agency because its model basically was oriented around local citizens in a community telling federal officials that they approve of the science and the technology that they were using to protect the land and to restore the land where it had become eroded away and in many cases severely damaged. And that local governing system created a partnership that allowed these so-called federal agents, to prosper and to be trusted as neighbors. And, early on, some of my personal techniques involved, if I had a farmer who had never really adopted the practices that most of the other farmers had adopted, I would go out to that individual's house at night in my own vehicle and I'd eat supper with them, or I'd sit on the front porch with them. And eventually, I might win one or two over. And, in other situations, I'd be working on a project. We'd be having meetings in a small church in the middle of a small rural community, and we'd hit a roadblock, and I'd end up calling the local road commissioner and saying, why are we not making any progress? And he'd say, well, so-and-so is coming to your meeting, and they're pretending to be happy, but they're not. I said, well, how do we make this person happy? Because I didn't know she wasn't happy.
Yeah.
And we fixed it, and we began to make progress again. So these relationships that I learned later working for 2 governors of Tennessee and interacting with United States senators and with CEOs and with various officials, 4 mayors of Nashville, this relationship process has always been kind of the answer to our problems. one of the reasons why I decided to leave government was, frankly, I kind of lost the patience to deal with, the tribalism that was beginning to emerge, because I actually had, people I'd known since high school and lobbyists that I worked with who told me, if I've learned if I don't go into your consensus building meeting, I don't have to compromise. I just don't show up. And it used to be that there was enough pain associated with not doing that people would eventually show up. The kind of problems that we're dealing with in society today are so diffuse and so distributed that the pain comes in little tiny increments, or at least in increments that are not large enough to make everyone go back to the table and compromise. So we'll get a big hurricane on the coast, but that only affected New Orleans, and it didn't really hurt the entire nation's economy. It only hurt their economy, But maybe it got Walmart's attention, and maybe the CEO of Walmart realized, hey, my supply chains are really damaged here. We can't have this happen again. Let's get involved in this climate discussion. And they did for that very reason. But it didn't reverberate as fast as, say, the Dust Bowl caused things to be reverberated, or that soil erosion all over the nation, and that green discharge water coming out of industrial plants, and black skies being created from air pollution. Those things kind of came home fast, and they were also being created by smaller tribes of individuals, so the rest of society as a whole could kind of coalesce around a consensus, and they could say, we're going to ask industrial dischargers, and we're going to ask farmers, to do their part, because the rest of us need to depend upon their success,
right?
And we're going to subsidize it in some cases, or we're going to stage it in. We're going to scale it up slowly so we don't bankrupt them in the process. The problem now is that we're all individually emitting CO2, and we don't want to vote against ourselves. We don't want to incentivize ourselves. We don't want to regulate ourselves, because every one of us are part of the problem and part of the challenge.
That makes me think of Dr. Catherine Hayhoe. I read her book twice now.
Yeah.
I love this woman who I got to meet because you invited me to her amazing talk at Lipscomb, and I got to read her book. I got a signed copy. Thank you, Dr. Hayhoe. I'd love for you to be on my show sometime. We're just going to throw that out there. But what she talks about is exactly what you're talking about. There's this disconnect between what we don't physically feel or see, right? We turn on a switch and a light goes on. But when that's taken away, right? And I've experienced in some of the snowstorms here in Nashville, my power's gone out multiple times. And I live in a subsidized area, right? And there's the environmental justice aspect too. And certain people are getting hit harder with these, with the backlash of the smaller groups of people creating a lot more of these carbon emissions, but the private groups that are actually kind of changing the direction. I think that's really interesting. You mentioned Walmart. Walmart has so much power. And Mike Vandenberg is the person that I was kind of alluding to earlier, and his whole research has alluded as well to these ideologies, these political tribes that have created this allegiance to whatever someone says because they're a Republican or they're a Democrat, or they just don't believe it because Al Gore said it and he's a Democrat, so we can't believe what he said. And there's a lot of power in the private industry that we can use as a consumer. But I guess what I'm trying to say is, how do we have power as an individual, right? And on a micro level that creates this macro, because it seems, again, it feels so heavy, it feels so big that it's why do we even worry about it? Because it's going to happen anyway. It's going to this, it's going to that.
Yeah, I often try to simplify it for my students in terms of, like when I'm teaching a particular class, I tell them, I want you to learn this in 3 levels. I want you to learn it as a citizen. How you vote is informed by these classes. And you need to use that knowledge in the people that are leading us and people you select to lead us. And then the second level is how do you consume? Are you going to buy plastic, or are you going to buy something that can be infinitely recyclable, and that will be food for something when it wears out, or that will be a technical nutrient for the economy that will never wear out. It'll never have to be buried like plastic is often. And then the third level is, what you bring as a professional to the equation. And that's why most of them are in grad school, and that's why you and I are here today. We're professionals. We're mature adults. We're expected to add value to society, not just as citizens, but as participants in modern society. And so we have expertise. And how we use that expertise and how we serve people is pretty critical. Now, the reason I frame it like that is because of the reality that I normally start with when I give this answer, and that reality is something like this. A few years ago, I did a test of my own carbon footprint, and I found out that, like everybody else, I was using like 4.4 or 4.3 or 4.5 planets with my behaviors. So I changed my lifestyle, and I got it down to about 2.5 or 2.3 planets. So that's not bad. Well, that's an extra planet more than I'm supposed to be consuming, or at least my piece of it. And I kept asking myself the question, why can't I get this lower? Oh, it's because I'm not living off the grid. I'm not way out in the wilderness, catching fish and eating deer in a regenerative way that's not depleting fish and deer populations. and I'm heating with regenerative wood that's not depleting the forest on the landscape. If I were living that way, I could be below that planetary consumption level. But because I'm connected to a society with infrastructure and pipelines that run across state lines and rivers that run across state lines and, interstate shipping of goods and services that were made in California that are sold in a store here in Tennessee, that's an efficient economy, but it's incredibly wasteful in terms of environmental impacts, in terms of CO2 emissions. Why should we be burning something that will never be on this planet again to take strawberries from California to Tennessee when we grow them in Tennessee, Wow. So, we're going to have to reorder this, and the way we reorder this, the only way we can reorder this is not by what we individually buy. It's by how we vote, what we individually buy, and how we behave as professionals in a larger tribe.
Oh, my gosh. That's awesome.
Well, thank you.
Yeah, policy. And see how it's just interwoven there. Mm-hmm. It's how you vote. Mm-hmm. Oh, goodness. That is something. I love that. Mm-hmm. Can we say it again? It's how you vote, how you consume, and how you are a professional in the world.
Yeah, that's it.
Those are the three things.
You can even say how you live as a professional.
How you
live and serve.
How you set an example.
Exactly.
To others.
Exactly.
Be the example. Inspire others to be better. That's what we say every single episode, right? Yeah. I'll give you a little success story. Ready?
Yes.
I just saw my dad for the first Thanksgiving in 6 years.
Wow, that's a big deal.
It was a blessing.
I'm glad it was a blessing. It's created to be a blessing. It doesn't have to be a blessing in order to protect ourselves from situations that are still struggling to become better.
It was a gift.
But I'm glad it did.
It was a gift. And you know a lot about me, so I know that's special. It was special for my dad and me to get together. And he is an old-fashioned guy. And he doesn't really know a whole lot about sustainability. He
was surprised to learn about your interest, huh?
He knows a lot about it. He doesn't say a whole lot. Sometimes he's a very good listener. And we had this beautiful weekend, and we went to the grocery store together.
Oh. Hey, that's. I used to take my students to Target and say, pick something here that you could throw on the ground, and it will be food for something 6 months from now.
I like that.
It's hard to find.
Well, we were on reusable bag topic. Okay, so this is one of the most simple things I think anyone and everyone can do is just avoid plastic bags like the plague. It's a real easy thing to do, and I know it's hard to remember them sometimes, but habits only get created when you continuously try to do it. And so I asked my dad. I said, "Hey, I got reusable bags. Do you want to use reusable?" No, I don't use those. Oh, Well, I do, so I'm gonna go grab mine. And we drove to the grocery store, and I asked him why he didn't use reusable bags. He said, "Well, it's just not convenient." I was like, "Well, that's an honest answer, and I appreciate that, right? Like that's
very honest answer.
That's what most people would say to me, or not say, right? Most people wouldn't say that. So thanks, Dad, for your honesty. We went to the store, and I ended up packing all of our groceries into these reusable bags. And we got home, and we didn't really talk much else about it. But the next day, we had another conversation, and he said, I might just go invest in some reusable bags. And I think it was how I was able to have that conversation with him and not attack him.
Yeah.
And not make him feel worse about it.
Yeah, just
but
an example of
sometimes that shame really fuels us to just continue in that bad habit.
Yeah, I think you may be not giving yourself a full break there by saying the word shame. Did you use the word shame just then?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think you're selling yourself short because I've been around you. I know how contagious your passion is and your dedication, and you back it up with knowledge, and people respect that.
Sometimes it's a awkward interaction.
Yeah.
And I mean it to be well, and I think people understand that about me once they get to know me, or they know me beforehand, and then they're like, "Oh, wow, you are passionate about that." But why aren't you? Right? Like, this is our world, not mine. This isn't just my world. This is our world.
Yeah, somebody told me one time something really interesting when I was really screwing up in life. He said, "Dodd," he says, "you're only responsible for cleaning up your side of the street, my behavior." So how I behave is the best sermon. It's the best sales pitch.
It starts there.
Yeah.
We're back to foundations.
That's what you did.
We're back to foundation. We're back to the basics. And so that's a great segue into how do we consume energy in Tennessee? Can we talk real quick about TVA?
Yeah.
And what that is?
Yeah. Yeah, that's a real hot topic right now, too.
Let's talk about that real quick, and then I'm going to try and get some of the questions in from some of my friends. But TVA, what is that?
Oh gosh, well, it's this wonderful opportunity to do good. It was created by Franklin Delano Roosevelt as part of the New Deal. Along with his solutions for the Dust Bowl, a senator from Nebraska created this immense federal project that electrified Tennessee, that also helped to create electricity to energize the Manhattan Project. That's helped end World War II without other sailors and military men dying, invading Japan. Unfortunately, we had to use nuclear energy to do that. But without TVA, a lot of much worse things would still exist today. And but TVA is in a unique circumstance. I actually interned with TVA for a couple of summers, and when I worked for Governor McWhorter and Governor Sundquist, because of that history and because of my history appreciation of the agency being this incredible innovator that changed the quality of life in the entire Tennessee Valley, and that today is keeping energy prices lower than almost every part of the country in the United States, and is the reason for why we can have such a vibrant economy with cheap energy and cheap water, because of the way they manage the Tennessee River. I found myself working with them on a regular basis, and one of the things that we learned was that they do what they know. They have coal engineers, they have hydroelectric engineers, they have nuclear engineers, they have natural gas peak power engineers, they have pump storage at Raccoon Mountain engineers. They don't have solar engineers. They don't have ground source heating and cooling engineers per se. So they do what they know, and unfortunately, they've invested heavily in a new proposal to expand natural gas use in Tennessee and natural gas pipelines in Tennessee.
Right.
And they're using a fuel that is not going to be at the same price that it is today, and it's not got an infinite supply. I mean, we're already fracking, deep subterranean areas of the earth to push the last remaining bubbles of gas out of the ground. What does that tell you about how easy natural gas is to get? It's not going to be any easier in the future than it is right now to get out of the ground. And so
it's not a solution.
Why in the world we're investing in that kind of infrastructure when we could be investing in other infrastructure. I don't know. I mean, it's partly because we don't have the scale of the base load energy and the peak energy to meet our pretty inefficient use of energy right now in the Tennessee Valley. We're among the highest per capita users of energy ourselves, so we have created the TVA problem.
Wow.
All of us.
Yeah.
So that goes back to what we were talking about earlier. We're not going to be willing to tax ourselves to fix the problem. So we're kind of in this circular logic kind of problem, But history says, that we tend to fix things when we intellectually and experientially run into big brick walls, and I think we will. And we've got people talking about TVA in the media right now, helping them see a new light.
Yeah, there's the TVA Coalition. Shout out to Brady Watson doing amazing work out there with SACE and just bringing a lot of things to light. And it's not about the attack, right? We're not attacking. It's just we have to have, as citizens, as people in this community, we have to have our voices heard. And it sounds like there's been a lot of progress to take local voice out of it. And that just can't happen, right? What is it like compared to Texas, for instance, and not that big incident that happened with their grid? What does that look like in the America or United States? Why are there like different? How is it all tied together, and how did come Texas had its thing?
It states under our federal constitution have enormous individual independent powers because that's how we came to be as a country.
Right.
We started off as kind of colonies that eventually evolved into states, that eventually evolved into a federal government infrastructure. And so the Tennessee Valley Authority is a federally created entity, so it's multi-state, and it has multi-state representation, and we have a lot wider variety of resources at our disposal here. And we're part of the oldest energy grid, in the continental United States. The eastern United States developed first. So we're already connected to ancient infrastructure and new infrastructure in the Northeast and part of the Midwest and the deep Southeast. So we're able to share electrons very easily.
Right.
I've actually been to the control room at TVA where they can show you how they can move electrons, from one part of the country to the other. And sometimes they have to dump energy off the grid when they have too much, by the way. It's kind of fascinating. But in Texas, they decided to go Texas. They do what Texans do, go big and go alone, go independent. And so they decided to basically put a fence around their electric network that made it a little more challenging, a little more difficult to trade electrons across the border. They also hired a private company to run it. That has legitimate incentives to behave the way they do, but that don't always have the incentive for everybody to afford it the same way and for everybody to get it in the most reliable way. And then they had a climate change event where a region of the world that almost never froze a lot deeper and a lot longer than it normally would, and things that would normally not freeze froze, including water that was mixed with natural gas within the pipeline, that when it transferred from one pumping station to another, it came above ground and it froze. And so it stopped their natural gas, and then they had homes that flooded, so you have to cut off electricity when things flood.
Man.
And it just became this huge super mess. But it's indicative of all of the assumptions that we currently get to benefit from today that will have to change when climate change changes it.
Yeah. That's so interesting. I have actually someone her son is in school in Texas, and she's got a question for us.
Yeah.
I'm going to play that for us real quick.
Hi, this is Tracy Utley, and I am a resident in Nashville, and I have a question around energy and vulnerability, meaning how confident are you in the infrastructure of our energy grid? I have a child who lives in Texas, and after what happened in Texas last year with winter approaching, I am very nervous for him. In addition to that, what do you feel like is our vulnerability for the possibility of some sort of attack on our energy grid? Thank you very much, and I look forward to hearing your answer.
Yeah, again, great leaders like Maris and I always choose hope because, frankly, we're not in the business of scaring people. We're not in the business of telling people things are bad unless they need to know something is bad so they can prepare for it. So, being honest about bad things is critical as being a leader too. But in this case, we don't have a lot of, near and present existential dangers in the temperate areas of the United States.
Right.
We have a lot of resiliency built in. We have a lot of different types of energy sources. We have a grid that's connected, as I said earlier, to other grids across the country. I actually have my students study the Eastern grid in the context of renewable energy so that they can understand the difference between, say, gigantic nuclear power plants and coal plants that are in one location that are pushing electrons across several states to a system where now electrons are coming directly into my house from my roof because now I've got solar panels on my roof. It doesn't even have to get on the grid if I don't want it to. So I think what she's alluding to is that Texas was the canary in the coal mine, and we all need to wake up to that. Climate change will change assumptions here. And there are critics of TVA right now that have legitimate criticisms, and hopefully TVA will listen. We have climate change that's going to change other assumptions and other partnerships and connections. And this is not the time to be building fences or to be cording off relationships. This is the time to be less tribal and more one tribe as a larger nation and fundamentally as a larger world.
Man, I love that. Yeah, this is, let's try to do one more. I know we're running out of time in this last one, but thanks for that. That's awesome. Thanks, Tracy, for tuning in. And I think Margaret here, her question is about hydro. Let's see.
And a second question, what are some of the up-and-coming shifts that he is seeing or is aware of, either locally in Tennessee or elsewhere, from fossil fuels to renewable energy outside of, say, electric-powered cars that I don't believe are fully viable for the general population, or mileage that is often driven, or the affordability of those vehicles?
Yeah, that's a fair question. I mean, skepticism is healthy. It makes us plan better. It makes us prepare better. Let me see if I can kind of tick off some kind of common things that we're all associated with. Every time we change to a new technology, it's always clunky. It's always difficult. I remember when cell phones looked like a brick and a half of mass with an antenna sticking out of it, and didn't hold a very long charge, and didn't, would drop a call frequently around town, and much less up and down the interstate. And now we know, we have computers and phones and enormous quality picture taking capacity, in addition to all these amazing apps in one device now. So that's an example of how technology evolves. So it's fair to be skeptical, but the reality is most things get better when everybody starts using them. Prices nearly always go down whenever everybody starts using them, unless the ingredients that go into the supply of the product are rare or not renewable.
Right.
Most of the things that go into phones are renewable. Even though they're called rare earth metals, it's only because they're rare in the context of all the other matter in the planet. They're not unavailable, and they're not small quantities because they're, quote, rare. It's just in the context of the larger planet. It was really bad branding when they labeled rare earth metals that way. But in the context of electric cars and batteries are getting better. I mean, I remember when I looked at a Nissan Leaf on a hot day in the summer, and we barely got a 25-mile charge on it, and I didn't think we were going to get back to campus after taking somebody for a ride in it because the charge ran down so fast.
Wow.
And now we've got 350-mile batteries. We've got a $5.4 billion investment by Ford in Tennessee to build electric trucks, to build their own batteries, to recycle their own batteries.
You may have just answered this question. This is the last one, then we're going to have to wrap up, but let's see what Grant had to say.
This is Grant from Nashville and New York. I have a question about electric batteries. While it's a good solution, the inputs and the costs associated with electric batteries are not sustainable and are detrimental to the environment. Is there anything in the horizon that's going to make that less impactful on the current environment? Thank you.
Oh, yeah.
You segued into batteries, and I had to put it in. Sorry, guys in the control room. We're almost done.
Yeah, there's no way to make mining nice or to make it easy on the planet. You know, I go back to us. You know, we created the behaviors and the technologies and the lifestyles that consume all this energy.
Yeah.
So you know, one, like Michael Jackson said, look in the mirror.
Nice.
And I'm talking to myself.
Nice.
And then secondly, there's no way around it. I mean, mines are very disruptive. You know, they rip up the planet. You know, fortunately, the deposits of rare earth metals, it kind of makes you wonder about the Creator's wisdom. You know, when we end up with an existential threat like climate change that requires rare earth metals for batteries and for other renewable energy technology, and it only exists in a few places in the world. And fortunately, the United States is one of the places where some of those elements, some of those key elements, exist in ample supply. They also exist in China, and I think the reason that our Creator created a situation like that is so that we would break down the anti-tribe, bashing of China, even though they don't treat their people as well as they should. We've got to get along with them one day and find better ways to get along. We certainly don't mind buying their products and eating their food for most of us. So I don't know enough about mining other than, cleaning up coal mines was one of the first things I did in my 20s and other mines, and they were horrible messes. They unleashed all kind of things that should have never have seen the light of day or been exposed to water, and they've killed rivers. And I've seen other kind of mines out west do the same. We're just going to have to figure out better ways of doing it and maybe be willing to invest in better ways of doing it, which means not expect everything to be cheap and not expect everything to be easy.
Wow.
But that's my best answer. So
Thank you. That's great. And thanks, Grant. Thanks, Margaret and Tracy, for giving those great questions. And thank you so much for being open to doing this today and answering those questions and to the best of your abilities with all of your knowledge and wisdom, because we don't have all the answers, but that's the point, is to be willing to ask the questions and be willing to be vulnerable and be willing to, all differences aside, work together. So again, we can't love the planet until we love each other. And we're not going to be able to see each other as human beings in this world without loving ourselves. And a lot of that comes from purpose. A lot of that comes from faith. A lot of that comes from hope. And as cheesy as it sounds, that really is. I mean, music says it too. It's all about love. And it starts there. So thank you for being here. This has been an amazing episode and a fascinating episode.
Thank you.
Great way to end the series. But I would love to have you on again sometime.
I'd love to.
I know that the guys want to talk to you more about the storm management stuff, stormwater management, which I'm pretty interested in as well. So thank you for being here. Till the next episode, remember to ask questions, inspire others to be better, to do better, and we can do anything when we stand united. That's a wrap. Thank you for listening to Critical Root Zone. If you'd like to reach out, email us at criticalrootzone@gmail.com. Critical Root Zone is produced in Nashville, Tennessee, copyright 2022.